we've been in this industry long enough where things go in cycles. And then,
It's kind of like my son in Jinko jeans. I never wanted to see that recycled, but here we
well,
are.
yeah.
Welcome back for another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. Today we're going to sit down with Amy Hart, a leader from the world of cosmetic contract manufacturing, to uncover the critical role manufacturers play in bringing beauty products to life. From navigating complex formulations and compliance regulations to scaling production and embracing sustainability, Amy is going to offer us an inside look at the challenges and innovations shaping the industry. A little bit about our guest, Amy. Amy Hart is the Chief Innovation Officer at Elevation Labs, which is a contract manufacturer with 3 locations in Colorado, Idaho, and Minnesota. Elevation Labs manufactures clean beauty, personal care products ranging from skincare, hair care, OTC, and color cosmetics, with end products sold in retailers such as Sephora, Ulta, Target, and dermatology offices, and much more. Amy has been with Elevation for 8 years and oversees R&D, business development, and customer experience, aka the demand team. And she is now heading into her 25th year in the cosmetic industry, where she first started as an R&D chemist at a contract manufacturer in the Northeast and has worked with many leading brands in the natural and clean beauty space. Amy has worked with such brands as Burt's Bees and Yes To, yet her true passion is being on the contract manufacturing side, where she can help leading brands continue to win market share with award-winning products. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was such a nice introduction. Glad to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, I was going to say when you had started as an R&D chemist at a contract manufacturer in the Northeast, that was with Autumn Harp, who that's where I met you a number of years ago. So yes, it's been a while. It's a little scary to hear 25th year because that means I'm not far behind you. And I never really thought in my wildest imagination I'd see the year 2025, yet alone this long of a juncture in my career. But here we are.
I know. It was such amazing. I mean, we met each other when we were 5 years old. We were started formulating products. I mean, it's all good.
Yes, yes. So today's episode, I think, is very interesting because, what I have been taking on recently is a lot of contract work. And I'm very surprised, I think, when people are like, okay, let's manufacture this product. And you're like, you have no idea, do you? Okay. So I'm really happy to be able to provide kind of this 101 primer. So to start, let's talk about what is a contract manufacturer. I know a little bit we introduced in that intro there, but what is a contract manufacturer and what services does a contract manufacturer provide?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different ways, when you say contract manufacturing that, contract manufacturers can be set up. Just so happens here at Elevation Labs, in my prior experience, typically what is involved in contract manufacturing is some sort of service in terms of R&D. So the fact that we have full R&D laboratory services means that, if a brand wants to, have a lab work on a new formula based on a brief that they have written and have a vision of like, hey, we want to develop a facial skincare serum, they would send us that brief. Our R&D team would work closely with their product development team or with our chemists, et cetera, develop that. And then kind of full scale move to full production, do a pilot, and make sure that that formula is manufactured in very high quality and delivers upon the vision of what that brand is hoping to deliver upon.
And something that some listeners have noted is the use of acronyms. And so I think leading into this conversation, sometimes the contract manufacturer can be referred to as the CM, or the CMO, which is a contract manufacturing organization, or even I've heard 3PM, which was be like a third party manufacturer. So just as a FYI to listeners, we may be using those interchangeably, and you can reference back to that contract manufacturer.
Yes.
And as part of the services offered, you touched upon it a little bit, but can you walk us through a typical process of what it looks like when a cosmetic brand partners with a contract manufacturing? What are those steps that you indicated from working with the lab all the way up to production that somebody can start to understand?
Yeah, sure. It's a very involved process, and it's you really want to make sure that you find the right partner, both sides, I would say, by the way.
Hmm.
But typically, when we start to work with a brand, we want to make sure that, hey, obviously we have an NDA in place. We want to make sure that if a brand reaches out to us and says, hey, I want to develop X, that we have the right capabilities to deliver on what that vision is. So once we, have that in place, an agreement in place, sometimes a, brand may want an NDA, they might want to have a quality agreement, etc. That's all finalized. We typically move to the ideation phase. So that's
Uh-huh.
when typically a product development team from the brand side would reach out to us. We would talk about if they have a brief that perhaps the formula has not been already developed and they want us to work on that, they would just send us a product brief and list out, hey, we want to develop, like I had mentioned, either a shampoo, a conditioner,
Sure.
etc. This is what we want the product to look and feel like. This is kind of like the price target we want it to be in. Here's the retailers where we plan to sell this. We want to make sure that it's regulatory compliant with, certain retailer restriction list, worldwide regulation list. Where is this product going to be sold worldwide? We move into that ideation phase, and that's where we really, the brand gets to work directly with the chemist.
Hmm.
So the chemist will start the iteration process. And I would describe that process, and that's kind of where you and I came from, of working on the bench.
Yeah.
So, I always get asked, like, how long does that take, right? And so ideally, you don't want it to take too long. You
Yeah.
really always want to work on a timeline and make sure that you're understanding that, hey, if we accept a brief, but it's launching in 9 months, we want to work backwards and make sure that we're conserving enough time to allow for the ideation phase, the
Sure.
formulation phase, the testing phase, the pilot phase, and the full production.
And I would also be careful what you say, because someone hearing that saying, "Oh, I can come to you and say I want to launch
Yeah,
in 9 months and
yeah,
you'll take it on." I
yeah,
heard that and I was like, "Would you even do
yeah.
that?"
That's a really, really good point. So every product type has their different timelines, and so yeah, my ops team would probably be like, no.
Yeah, you could cut.
Yeah. 9 months is pretty aggressive. So for
Yeah.
those who may not have gone through this, typically I would describe a very typical non-OTC product, so
Sure.
street cosmetic, is a typical timeline is a year from
Yeah.
ideation to full scale. But we go back and forth on R&D, and we typically aim to have that formula finalized within 3 to 4 iterations or less. And that's where we would send samples back and forth to the brand. They would try it, they would use it, they would give us some feedback, etc. Meanwhile, we would try to be doing some prelim stability. So
Hmm.
stability testing is making sure that the product holds up in different conditions, high heat, freeze-thaw conditions, etc.
Yeah.
And then once that formula is finalized, that's when we go into that testing phase.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And is the formula is finalized in terms of the brand or customer that you're working with says this is exactly how I want it?
Yeah. And so what I just described is, when our R&D teams are working on that, we also, there's opportunities, say, and I know, Jennifer, you do this, where you are working, you contract and you may develop products for other people, right? And
Hmm.
so we would call those, and you would come to a contract manufacturer and say, hey, I have this formula. I've got it already developed where I want it to be. We would call that a tech transfer.
Yeah.
So the formula's already been developed, it's been written, it's been proved out already. So then we would still take it into our R&D lab, make sure that works with our equipment, make sure that we have all the right raw materials that match to the brand's, the level of quality that they want, and, all the specifications are met, and make sure that we are coming out with the exact same product that has already been developed.
Yep.
Something that's kind of interesting, everybody has always asked me, what's faster? I would always describe the tech transfer process to take longer than if we were to develop in-house.
Okay.
It's one of those interesting things that, you would think, oh, something's already established, it's already made. There's always some kind of meeting a product that's already out in the market exactly as is.
Yeah.
Seems to be a little bit trickier than just creating one from ground up. There's
Yeah.
just always some things that you have to do to make sure that there is absolutely no changes or differences between the products.
Okay. And so you have an approved formula. What happens then?
Sure. And then, once we have the approved formula, we then go into what we call our testing phase. So we work with the brands. From the contract manufacturing side, we typically do our own in-house stability testing. That's where you do a variety of testing, heated conditions, room temperature, freeze thaw, et cetera. Pretty standard in the cosmetic industry. That's about a 12-week test. We do that in glass, and then we do our packaging compatibility test. So again, making sure that the product is put into the final packaging, make sure that it pumps out right, that there's no interactions, no paneling of bottles, etc. And we test that for 12 weeks. We also do, for any water-containing products, the PET, preservative efficacy testing. We usually typically send that out to a third-party micro-testing lab, making sure that the preservative system that is used and chosen for that any given formula is robust enough to stand up against the standard microbes in our industry. And then we start in that phase also kind of work our way up towards planning towards a pilot or a scale up. And typically that's just a smaller version of a full-blown production scale process. So that can range anywhere from like 50 kgs, et cetera, so smaller scale.
And so some nuances in terms of this next step that, I want you to elaborate on too is kind of that full toll model versus, maybe not a full toll model. I don't even hybrid, what is that called when it's not a full toll model? But, when you're talking about scaling up to that pilot, you've obviously created a formula and you have a lot of ingredients and vendors that you need to work with to order those materials.
Yes.
A contract manufacturer that provides, let's say, full toll services, they would be in charge of ordering those materials to meet the demand of the number of units that the customer would want to produce, correct?
Exactly. So the customer would place their first purchase order, the PO, and we would order those raw materials against that PO. And we, place a PO for a pilot. Some brands want to say, hey, I want to do less risk, make sure that the pilot goes fully well before I, place my first PO of a full production order. But yeah, basically we would then procure all the raw materials for that formula for that first, whether we call it a first manufacturing batch, whether we do a pilot or that first scale, the first time you make it in production is what we call our first manufacturing batch. And that's when you have to make sure you are aware of, what's critical to us is that we're working with established raw material suppliers that have good lead times, that can support us with regulatory documentation, of course, high quality, making sure that the raw materials are coming in and meeting all the specifications that we have outlined and chosen in R&D. But that is where you kind of wait on that longest lead raw material before you can actually move into production.
And are you also engaging with brands on ordering the primary packaging that they're using, secondary packaging, or are you finding more that when brands come to you, they're having their own primary, secondary packaging shipped to you guys so that you have everything on site as well as the labeling?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our model is we prefer our customers to supply primary and secondary packaging. That's it. What you're describing, there's a mix. So directed turnkey is when a customer, if we engage with a directed turnkey opportunity, that means the brand has identified exactly what packaging they want, and they say, hey, can you guys purchase that for us? Typically for us, our customers go ahead and purchasing the packaging, they're actually sourcing it, and then they send it to us. And so we time it exactly for when those last raw materials are going to get here. And we want to make sure everything's in-house like 4 weeks before we start production, just so we can start that process.
Yeah. And I guess part of elements that maybe brands don't see too is when you get that packaging, you guys are running line trials, right?
Yes.
You're understanding what the settings have to be for the viscosity of the material, all of that. So can you talk a little bit more about how you guys even do that background line trial in the interim?
Absolutely. So not only do we do kind of scale up compounding trials for the actual bulk, when we scale up from R&D, we go from like a 500 ml beaker to a 50 kg batch in compounding. That's what we call our compounding scale up, and that's a lot of attention is paid to that. The chemist goes to the compounding area, make sure the bulk comes out. But yeah, just as important, a lot of times probably overlooked in our industry, is the importance of field trials. So it can be very interesting, and we've been in this industry long enough to know that, hey, you say a tube, well, every tube's slightly different, right? So if you want to use the squeeze tube, but it's got maybe a little bit of a thicker, 2-layer, 3-layer, maybe the heat settings on the sealers of the tube machine have to be set a different way than the tube that we just ran. So that's where you absolutely have to dial in, dosage, heating elements, the speed of the line, etc. I mean, it's all over the map in terms of, are we working with a gel cleanser? Can we create bubbles on the line that we don't want? Or do we want bubbles? And do we have to create those on the line? And then we get into hot pour, some of our favorite products, and that's the history of you and I. Is like, those are probably some of the most tricky fill trials. You got to make sure the cooling temperature is right, the hot
The
filling
holding temperature,
temperatures,
yeah. The mixing speed, all of it,
yeah.
yes.
And I think the key really is making sure that you capture those details during that pilot fill trial phase so that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel maybe 2 months further down the road when you're doing that first. Or you're going back to the packaging supplier and going, hey, absolutely, this would have worked better if the pumps didn't come in a plastic bag and we didn't have to take one every hour. So there's so many things that we look for at that point.
And you initially started with talking about choosing a contract manufacturer.
Yeah.
What should a product developer consider when they're choosing a contract manufacturer?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have a lot of passion, obviously, for being on the contract manufacturing side. I think what really helped me in my career to understand what it takes to be a good contract manufacturing was to be on the brand side and to work with contract manufacturers and to understand what is that relationship, how should it look, what are those key things you need to find. And I think first and foremost is full transparency.
Sure.
If you do not have full transparency with any partner in your life, that can go awry, but especially with the contract manufacturer, and it all starts kind of in the beginning in R&D. If you say, hey, I need access to my formula, I need access to my raw materials, I need those documents for registration purposes, I need to know what's in that. If the contract manufacturer you're exploring or working with saying, hey, actually no, that information belongs to us, that's kind of a red flag, right? Because
Sure.
it really should be a partnership. It should be,
Yeah.
Our stance is we're working behind the scenes to make a brand shine in the spotlight. Yeah. So we want to provide all of that information. And then second, transparency is number one, but you could almost argue high quality. Like if you don't have high quality, nothing else really matters. So you've got to make sure you've got to ask the right questions, whether or not a facility is FDA registered or not. You want to make sure that they've gone through some pretty good audits. And I would highly recommend that you would audit a contract manufacturer yourself. Check out the quality systems, ask those difficult questions, make sure that they are proving to you that they have exactly what they're telling you that they have, which goes back to the transparency.
And, I have encountered contract manufacturers, right, who do not want to disclose certain elements. What is the rationale behind not being transparent?
It's a really great question because it was one of my pet peeves on the brand side. If somebody wasn't being transparent, I was like, well, what is it that, you're hiding? Because to me, that's kind of a big red flag. I think there's a misconception of it belongs to us. It's our formula. We developed our formula ownership. Here at Elevation Labs, we have a different stance. Like formula ownership should belong to the brand. Yeah. And so to me, when somebody's not willing to share, it's more of a business desire to keep that,
that relationship.
That relationship, or, if it's their formula, they want to hold on to it so that the brand always has to only go to them to buy that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, my experience in the past.
Circling back to quality, you mentioned the FDA registered. What are some other areas that you would encourage customers to probe their contract manufacturers about in terms of the quality standards that are internally set?
Yeah, I think asking questions about, incoming inspections for raw materials, for packaging, what is their quality system like? Do they perform AQLs, etc.?
Ooh, what are AQLs?
I'm probably not the right person to ask. It's all quality limits. So not quality just for, but so basically, if you have a package of bottles come in, you do a number of sampling. If they all pass, it's all statistics run. That case of packaging is good. If it fails, you go to the next level of AQL and you take more samples. So it's really just a statistical analysis of passing and failing of a quality inspection. I also think, as often as possible, if you can, to try to get references from other customers. This can be tricky sometimes because we do, typically sign NDAs with customers. But there are customers that are willing to say, hey, actually, I'd be willing to talk to somebody and give a reference.
And I'm very curious about, so I have visited other contract manufacturers, and it's always like, no pictures. We can't disclose the brands that we work for. And I feel like that's your biggest selling point, right? So, yes, there's an NDA, but, what do you think is driving that kind of secrecy behind who manufactures what? Because sometimes I'm very surprised when engaging with one, when I see a product, I'm like, no shit, you do that?
I know it's interesting because yeah, we don't advertise the customers we work with. However, if you were to walk in one of our facilities, you would see on our display shelves some of the amazing brands that we work with. So you just
Yeah.
kind of see it. I would say I've heard directly from our customers. Sometimes they're like, "You guys are just too good. We don't want the secret.
Oh.
Like
Yeah.
we don't want our competitors to know that you've developed this because we just it. But it, which is it's I understand it from their side. However, we would never take a formula that we produce for a brand and formulate it
Yeah.
for somebody. Like it just everything belongs to the brand. So that's just something we wouldn't do. But I understand
Yeah.
the concern. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for pictures and stuff, we typically, hey, just focus in on your product.
Yes.
But then sometimes it's like we've had visitors in the past, and you know, you'd have to be careful because sometimes people have their own operations, and if you're giving your trade secrets away of how you've set up a machine, it's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
gotta be careful.
Understandable.
Yeah.
And when we talked about quality, something that came to mind is, kind of how regulatory and safety lies into that
Yeah.
quality. How do contract manufacturers support brands to be in regulatory compliance and to ensure safety of their products?
That's a great question. To me, it all starts in the beginning with those raw material suppliers and documentation that, we have on file. We have a very robust process to make sure that when we're asking for a sample that we're getting all of the documents up front. And so if there's some basic documents that a supplier can't fork over, I don't care how amazing the material is, we're not going to use it because we just know that that's kind of a red flag. So it starts there. But then it's just kind of some of those, standard safety tests. The brands that we work with are usually very well established in understanding that, unfortunately there's not, black and white rulings of what kind of testing needs to be done in our industry for non-OTC cosmetics. However, things like safety testing, things like eye testing, things like the PET, etc., those are the kind of things that we can help a brand with, recommend. Like if it's not listed on their brief and they don't really know what they're doing, we can absolutely point them in the right direction and make sure that they're covered. And then in terms of registration, making sure that we are providing, if they're saying, hey, gluten-free on your packaging, that we're recommending, let's make sure we do a gluten-free test. Let's make sure the raw materials have that certification, et cetera. So there's all those kind of balances and checks that we can do.
And I guess where does that responsibility lie? Let's say I'm a brand and I don't have a lot of financing and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take the risk. I don't want to do this safety testing that's highly recommended. At that point, obviously you're like, well, that's a big risk, but are you able to manufacture the product and say, yes, but the responsibility is no longer on us. This is, this was your decision.
Yeah, the safety of products do fall on the brand as the brand owner. We are responsible for manufacturing the product under, how we've designed it and, making sure that it's high quality, it's stable, that it passes micro, et cetera. But for any claims specifically made by a brand, those claims are made by the brand and they really have to be careful on the types of claims being made. That's very passionate. And it's to us too, it's like if we're working with a brand that, doesn't know what they're doing and making kind of wild claims, that's just probably not a great fit for us.
I was going to say, when we talked about finding a right fit, I guess from your side, there also needs to be, it's your reputation, right? And so you also need to vet brands for their willingness to comply with standard testing and, kind of the rules of play, rules of engagement, let's say.
Yeah. And we're pretty strict. I mean, we don't want to be on a list that says, hey, Elevation Labs made this product that ended up, so we are pretty choosy in making sure that we are following the rules and recommending as such to our customers as well. So.
Great.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown. giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
What do you think the biggest challenges contract manufacturers face today?
I mean, to me, it's kind of like hasn't changed over the past few years. It's a lot is lead times. How fast can you create a product and get it out on market?
Yeah.
That is on trend, completely stable, right price. Like all those things have to add up, and how quickly can you do it?
Yeah.
And by the way, you have to work with a celebrity who changes their mind every day. Not just it can be different things, but it's really comes down to like lead time. But lead time, it's not always about the raw materials. It's about every stage and making sure that you always have backup plans to every action that you're taking. And to me, it's about that timing and making sure that you stay on trend.
And I've heard, and I think I've observed firsthand that COVID and it's starting to rebound, but COVID had a significant impact on lead time. Are you starting to see those lead times gradually go down or back to some sense of normalcy?
Definitely, they've come down for sure, and that was a big push that we've really partnered with us. So we work with some amazing suppliers that have, even if it's a longer lead time, say it's a product ingredient we're buying from France. We've worked out stocking agreements that maybe they hold in New Jersey, et cetera. Maybe some things that they weren't doing because they couldn't during COVID. So we worked that out. It's still an area of opportunity for all of us to still come down on lead times, but it's definitely gotten better.
Yeah. And I guess leading back to that, how do you navigate challenges when it comes to raw material shortages or, regulatory changes, production delays? I think a great example that I think I've used in the past is I remember when we were working together, jojoba oil became it was impossible to get, and it required a lot of reformulation and a lot of disappointment from our customers. But with climate change and the variability of raw materials that are based on plant-derived ingredients, how is a contract manufacturer navigating those challenges?
Yeah, they pop up every single week. So I think every single week. So I think first and foremost, you just have to kind of anticipate that there's always going to be a curveball thrown at you. It's really making sure that you always have kind of backup options. I think going back to transparency, making sure that you have that transparent dialogue with your suppliers too. One thing that we've done, we've had to get super creative in making sure that we're forecasting appropriately. So the more that we can get information from our customers on, hey, this is what I think we're going to do this year, which is hard. Like it's literally everybody's trying to predict from their crystal ball what they're going to sell and what they're going to launch. But like, even if it's something, we can go back to our suppliers and go, here's what we're thinking, because we've had situations where we've had to be on allocation for a lot of raw materials. So at least we want to get our name on that list first. So the more, and I would really highly recommend stressing this to brands out there that don't be afraid to give forecasts to the contract manufacturers.
Yeah, you're not holding them accountable.
No, it just is so incredibly helpful. I just was having a conversation literally this morning on argan oil. There's a situation with argan oil right now, and we have a brand that we work with overseas, and a product we make is 100% argan oil, and the price is going to go through the roof. So we're going to reach out and ask, hey, can you give us a yearly forecast for this so we can try to negotiate? And it's because of our great supplier of this material who she said, hey, listen, I want to give you a heads up. So it's like having that conversation, it's cyclical, that you just need to make sure you're always talking and just not holding back and waiting for a PO and then going, oh, by the way, it skyrocketed 2x. So.
Yeah. Okay. And, I want to lead into a little bit now on kind of how, brands can best support engagement with contract manufacturers. But I wanted to come back with, we were talking about that stage in which the R&D lab starts to develop formulas and then they give it to brands to test. What is the advice? And because this is something I encounter quite a lot, and it's infuriating, where you give a customer the product and they're like, I don't know, it smells. And you're like, okay, but do you want to add a fragrance?
Yeah.
For anyone listening, what is that advice that you would give to brands when interacting in terms of contract manufacturers, beginning with that iteration portion in giving feedback?
Yeah, I think it's really, really helpful to be pretty granular on what exactly it is you're going after.
Yeah.
Like in terms of, hey, I want this product to look like this, feel like this, cost in this area, and these are the ingredients I need to stay away from.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the things I'm willing to give on. If there are benchmarks out there, that's
Mm-hmm.
helpful. It's
Okay.
also really helpful to understand what you absolutely don't like. So dialing in like what you like and what you don't like are really good for the chemist to hone in on what that product how it should perform. If there's any clinical testing that you plan to do with a product afterwards, having that information up front, super important to make sure that the right ingredients are chosen,
At
not
the
just the
right
active
level.
ingredients.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to stress this, the non-functional, I shouldn't say it like that, but the non-active ingredients are just as important to make sure that, if we're trying to deliver vitamin C into the skin, that we're using the right ingredients to penetrate to achieve a brightness level after, for clinical testing. So I think dialing it in. I think if there's communication struggles, I always recommend going on site, if you can, to a contract manufacturer, those stages of a formula tweak, so you're not wasting too much time. But FaceTime, Zooming, rubbing it out, showing people fragrance also, if you're choosing to use a scent, whether it's fragrance, aromatic extract, essential oil, having that decision up front is going to be also incredibly helpful in terms of the chemist dialing it in right in the get-go.
Yeah. And how do you foresee contract manufacturers to the bench chemists interacting with brands in terms of innovation? So how do you see those relationships form? What kind of innovative ideas have brands brought to you? Talk a little about what you've observed.
Yeah, I think where the true magic happens is when you've worked on a couple of projects and you really got in really well. You start to finish each other's sentences on a product development call, and you can kind of anticipate, hey, I just saw this ingredient. I was thinking of your brand. I think it'd be great. I think we do a couple things on our side to always spark innovation. One is our iBox program, where we launch about 40 different products a year. And they're kind of just new textures, highlighting ingredients that we're jazzed about, on trend. And then the other thing that we do for many of our customers is what we do a white space analysis. We call it our Innovate to Elevate program. And this is what I really love to do is, we'll take a brand that we've been working with and we'll look up their full lineup. And it really forces, myself, the chemist, whoever's working on it, to look at every product they have, even if it's products we don't make, and try to find those gaps, the white space, and say, hey, here's an idea. And it's when you start having those conversations with a brand, that just sparks creativity.
Yeah.
They may go, hey, we don't really love that. However, what you just said, we were thinking about for this type of product. And I tell you, that's where we've had more innovation conversations move forward, is from those kind of getting in depth, looking at a brand and not just focusing on, oh, I made this product. Okay, what's my next product? Look at the brand overall and making sure that also the brand understands the full capabilities of the contract manufacturing. That's also happened to us where, somebody might know us for hair care, right? But they're like, oh, we didn't realize you're amazing at facial skincare too, so it's making sure that they understand, because those facial skincare products may have an amazing texture for a leave-in conditioner. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you think a contract manufacturer doesn't stagnate in terms of, so let's say somebody is well known, incredible for color cosmetics, right? And then it becomes very difficult for them to be known for anything else, and or to flex a certain diversity, right? Because they've cultivated experience to an infrastructure that supports that. How do contract manufacturers not stagnate and have a broad range of experience to offer a diverse network of clients?
Yeah, no, I think it's really just dialing in what you do very well and making sure you're not trying to be all things to all people. I think, because losing credibility can be pretty damaging. So I think making sure that you really know what you're doing very well. For instance, mineral sunscreens, we're very adept to that in combining, especially what I would call hybrid color mineral sunscreens. So, making sure you're not growing stagnant is okay, we can produce a beautiful SPF 30 with zinc oxide. Okay, so next year we're going to push ourselves to SPF 40, and we're going to actually do it with less of a whitening than SPF 30. So making sure that you're constantly raising the bar of what you already do. And I think that's how you move away from being stagnant, is just constantly raising that bar, whether it's through formulation or equipment filling or, many different things that sustainable filling options, etc.
Yeah. And how does the relationship with the relationship with raw material vendors, how does that differ between how they interact with you versus how they interact with a brand?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite similar. I think some of our best raw material supplier partnerships is when they kind of know who we're working with, and they have materials and like, hey, I showed this to X and this X brand, and they're interested, so you may think about, and so having those conversations. I think sometimes with brands, they may show full finished product protocol, prototypes, and try to sell that, which I think they do a great job, because they'll say, hey, I use this at 3% active, that we've done the testing, they show that to a brand, and then the brand comes to us and go, hey, I want to use this active 3%. And we're like, oh, the price is so high. That's where you can, those really great suppliers are like the ones that kind of meet in the middle and go, I showed it to them, but we think you could achieve the same results using it this level, knowing that we've got to kind of manipulate the whole formula. So.
And have raw material suppliers engaged with you in those prototypes and saying, I made this, do you think it's achievable? Because, I definitely know I've encountered things before where it's like, oh, it's beautiful. And you're like, I'm not going to achieve that viscosity at full scale production.
I know, we definitely have had our history there. I mean, I think there's definitely, it's all across the board, but I think more and more raw material suppliers truly understand that to sell their materials at the levels that they want, they do have really great, usually technical teams in the background, making sure that their products are stable. I think we've given a lot of advice to our suppliers that, sustainable, affordable, great lead times. It's got to be everything. You can't just have one.
Yeah.
And so that you've got to, like, for us to feel good about pitching these materials, like, it's got to be the total package. And I think their technical teams are really helpful in terms of achieving, especially in that mineral sunscreen space, like helping us, like, hey, a lot of times we get to see first, shot at a new material that may be launching it in cosmetic.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, what do you think? And so we'll start to work with our suppliers, and it's a great partnership.
Great. And that leads nicely into, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of either clean beauty, sustainability, ingredient innovation? What are some of those trends that you've observed?
Yeah. I mean, I think the less is more trend is still a trend that, has been around, but it continues to grow. I think consumers are, wanting every single ingredient in a formula to have a purpose and a function, not just fillers. So I know we say clean beauty and natural, and there's no definition behind that, but that is a trend that is not going away. But what I would add to that is safe. Like, I think a trend that has come back over the last couple of years is making sure that products are safe. It's not just clean isn't good enough. Natural, who really cares, because that doesn't really have a definition. We want to make sure the product is clean, sustainable, safe, and efficacious. Like those trends. And I think those raw materials, anywhere from retinol alternatives to retinol, but making sure that whatever you choose, whether it's one or the other, they are actually working and doing something, and you're not just buying.
So substantiation.
Yeah.
And in terms of sustainability, there's obviously a lot of different ways that something can be sustainable, from ethically sourced, cradle to grave, biodegradability, carbon land use. Is there anything specific that you're finding brands want to focus on more in terms of sustainability?
I think it's interesting because sustainability is always evolving. And I think brands have, either it's such an interesting part of a brand's ethos that we see this kind of definition of sustainability all over the map, like with the different brands that we work with. So I think for the most part, it is about kind of the raw material language, the stories that they use, and what makes them sustainable. I also think, there is a push for like using less water, for instance, in formulations or in the manufacturing process, making sure that we are not, just going through a ton of water to produce more water to be shipped across the world. So
How do you see the industry evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? I've observed the emergence of fragrance companies that are utilizing AI in terms of creating complex formulations and distinguishing notes. Where do you think contract manufacturing will be leading?
I think contract manufacturing is still going to play a critical role helping support brands. As I mentioned, being that silent partner behind the scenes, making sure that we're developing products that are award winning, that they're on trends. I do think brands, I've started to feel this a little bit, are maybe doing less launches per year, but making
Mm,
sure that those launches are A launches. I mean, there's so much competition in any store, et cetera.
yeah.
Everybody launching new brands every day. So I think contract manufacturers are needing to rise to the occasion to make sure that what they're developing is absolutely on trend, is safe, is effective in delivering. I think we're going to continue to see, fragrance develop. I think the use of AI is going to be very interesting. Biotechnology has been a really interesting road to follow over the past few years. I don't think that's dead.
Yeah.
But I do think consumers are just questioning a lot of in terms of, all of it, the ethos, the safety, the sustainability, what is right for my skin. I think, as the world just continues to get more populated, more polluted, more sensitive, like what are the products on my skin, on my hair, et cetera, that are going to not only be good for me, but the planet, and making sure that I'm not having reactions.
No. In terms of like manufacturing technology, I was when we were at Autumn Harp, for instance, part of that onboarding process was to kind of work in all aspects of batching to the
Mhm.
line. And something that I was very surprised about was how manual
Yeah.
creating some of the maybe secondary boxes were, and kind of taking product and putting that in. And are you seeing any, advancements in technology to automate things, to even the use of robotics in the
Mhm.
field to make it so that this process is less manual and can be done at a faster rate?
Yeah, absolutely. That is always an area that we're constantly exploring and investing in. I think the fine line for contract manufacturing is obviously you can't go full automation because you lose a lot of that flexibility. So, but absolutely, we have invested, in a lot of auto weight checkers and
Oh.
auto cartoners, master shipper put-togethers. I know there's a better word for that.
Yeah.
My ops team again would kill me right now, but there's a lot of that to make sure that we are being more efficient, and especially like making sure that it's ergonomically okay for our people to be standing there all day, folding
Yeah,
cartons.
that was, I think, the
Yeah,
biggest surprise was the physical
yes,
demand that a
exactly.
lot of that puts on not only the
Yeah,
price, right? When
totally.
leading back to, when you're engaging with brands and talking about price,
Yeah,
automation adds
yeah.
cost, or not automation adds
No, yeah,
cost,
manual
manual.
labor. Yeah, and I mean that's another area where we have made some big suggestions to brands where, the inner sleeve of a component that somebody's like it may be beautiful to open up, it goes right in the trash, maybe the recycling if you're lucky, but like that's not only adding cost, but that potentially it's adding consumer disappointment if somebody's very sustainably minded. So, we're always trying to make those recommendations too when launching new products of like, hey, think about this, or if you label it like that, we could use our auto labeler, et cetera. So those are the kind of conversations I also recommend for a brand to make sure that you're asking what kind of equipment would be best for this product, because you will save some pennies and some cents there.
All right. Well, to close this out, what advice would you give to new brands or entrepreneurs who are looking to partner with a contract manufacturer for the first time?
I would just say, it's really helpful for the contract manufacturer side when you're approaching a new contract manufacturer to really explain the vision of your brand, where you're going, where you're headed, what you want to do, making sure that you're asking the right questions of the contract manufacturer, making sure it's a great fit for you because it's going to be most likely a long-term relationship.
Hmm.
And like I said before, that transparency is key. Going on site, having a tour face to face, I really believe is always very, very helpful. So maybe you
No.
can't do that if you're exploring maybe 10, but maybe when you get down to 3 and you're trying to make those final decisions, like invest up front because you will see a lot and hear a lot. It's also like what you're not seeing that is going to clue you in on whether that's going to be a good relationship or not. So,
Oh, great. Well, thank you for your sage advice.
Feel so old. Thank you.
Our listeners will appreciate learning the little bit of information that the ins and outs of contract manufacturing life, for sure.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Always good to
Yeah.
connect with you.
Yeah. Thank you.